I did not have an opportunity last week to speak publicly about the George Floyd event. And we actually, Friday, I believe it was, last week, I had surgery Wednesday, was out of pocket Thursday. Friday, we released a statement internally to the agency reference that event, and of course Saturday we had issues that began. But I want to read the statement that we released to the officers last Friday. So the recent incident out of Minneapolis is a tragedy that should never have occurred. It's cast a dark cloud over our honorable profession. In plain speak, it was wrong. Each of the officers involved abandoned their sworn duty, detoured from their sworn oath and training, and as a result, George Floyd was tragically killed. It's important that all JSO members take time to reflect on the way that we do our jobs here in Jacksonville, with honor and respect for those we serve. I know each and every one of you, again, this being to the members of JSO, share that perspective. I want you all to stand proud in your commitment to your community, bolstered by your training and your dedication to serve. The Minneapolis officers and their actions do not define you or our profession, and your actions and the way you uphold your oath to our community define you, to our agency, and to our city. So remember who you are, count on one another as you work in service of our great city and our community to make our vision a reality. And we followed up with our vision statement of the agency, a crime-free environment driven by partnerships with empowered citizens, fostering a vibrant community and the success of all individuals. So again, we did not, with all the activity and the issues that I had, we didn't get a chance to do that last week, so I wanted to do that today before we did this recap. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor and for some comments, and then we will work into the recap, and then after the recap, we'll be available for some questions. So, Mayor.
Good afternoon. Lose track of time. Sheriff, thank you. And your reading that statement just reminded me of a conversation that you and I had just after the tragedy that was George Floyd. And I called you and I asked you, is there a way that you and I could communicate that sentiment to the public? And you were ahead of it. You said, most importantly, more than us saying something outside, you'd already communicated that message to the men and women for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. So I appreciate that, and I think it's important that the public knows that. I want to thank you, Sheriff, and the men and women of Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. It's good to be here with you today. I just concluded a meeting with City Council where I briefed them on my civil emergency declaration surrounding this past weekend's violent events in downtown Jacksonville and my rescinding of that order tonight. I want to start by saying I'm grateful for the citizens who expressed their First Amendment rights in a just and peaceful way on both Saturday and Sunday. They followed a proud American tradition and made their voices heard loud and clear. They raised many legitimate concerns in a civil and just way in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, as they always do when organizers come to them, worked with them to safely express their views. Following those peaceful protests, however, a small group of bad actors resorted to violence, vandalism, and the endangerment of public health and safety. The violence resulted in numerous instances of vandalism, damage to personal property, destruction of JSO vehicles, and even attacks on our officers. And another example that this threat is still with us, at 4 a.m. this morning, a firebomb was tossed into our fleet management yard. The Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department rapidly responded and extinguished the fire. There was no damage to city vehicles. There was minimal damage to the grounds. And thank God there was no damage to individuals. But this demonstrates that I and we will be prepared to again enact emergency declarations or curfews to respond to these actions if necessary. We will not stand for that kind of violence in Jacksonville, Florida. And while I am rescinding the emergency order tonight, we will use the resources that we have to protect our city. The decisions that I made over the weekend and as we move forward, and informed with intelligence and advice I received from Sheriff Mike Williams and law enforcement professionals at the local, state, and federal levels. We remain in constant communication at all levels, and they continue to provide the advice, expertise, and intelligence information to us as we move forward. As we move forward, I want the people of Jacksonville to know that I and we remain committed to open communication between the sheriff, public safety professionals, and the people of Jacksonville to address their needs and their concerns. This continuing dialogue is crucial to building a better and safer and very fragile idea that we've seen on full display, not only in our city but in our country, and that is one city, one Jacksonville for all citizens. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So before I go through the recap, I want to take a minute and thank some of our partners who have been very beneficial and helpful, obviously, to us in these last several days. I'm joined by Major Harris of FHP, who played a role in helping us over the weekend. We've got support from local sheriffs, regional sheriffs. I don't want to list everybody because I'm going to forget somebody, but obviously all of our regional sheriffs, local partners, state-level partners, our federal partners have been a huge help in terms of helping us communicate with other cities around the country as they are dealing with some of these issues and learning from what they're seeing. It was been very beneficial to have that resource available, so I wanted to thank them before we got started. So, and the mayor's done some of this recap, so just bear with me. But Saturday, about 1:30, protesters began to arrive in and around the Police Memorial Building. That was a pre-planned, organized event. We had meetings with the event organizers prior to the event occurring, and roughly an estimate, we believe now, of over 3,000 people attended that event downtown on Saturday. Within about 2 hours, the main peaceful part of that event had ended. We had marches, people walked, obviously their voices were heard, and they were accomplished what they wanted to accomplish for the day, and most of the individuals from the peaceful protest Monday morning left the area. Of those remained, again, about 400 people. They continued to stay downtown throughout the day, mostly congregating on Bay Street, and then they began to get mobile later in the day. As they began to move around the city, things began to happen downtown. Barricades were picked up and thrown. Streets were blocked of traffic where we had not blocked streets for the demonstrators to walk. That escalated to bricks, rocks, and bottles being thrown, police cars being damaged, and ultimately, really even initially, police officers being attacked at that event. So obviously we had some prior planning and staged officers that allowed us to quickly respond to the rioters. And with that, we deployed field force, additional officers, and as I mentioned, Saturday night, elements of our SWAT team as well to come in and help with that. We were able to, by about 10 o'clock, resolve that event for the evening, minus a few stragglers. At the end of that event, we had made 25 arrests. 23 of those were Duval County residents. The charges include unlawful assembly, resisting with violence, affray, battery on a law enforcement officer, and criminal mischief are some of the charges. We had 4 officers that were injured that night. One being, has been widely talked about, was slashed in the neck with some type of object. 2 others hit with bricks. One hit with a piece of tree limb or debris. We had additional officers report injuries the next day. All of those officers are recovered or recovering and will be fine. We had 6 JSO vehicles damaged, including the officer who was stabbed. His vehicle was one of the worst ones damaged. We also had a JFRD vehicle damaged, and obviously, as you've seen, and you guys have reported, multiple businesses with windows broken out and a lot of spray painting around the downtown area. So I'll move to Sunday. Sunday morning, about 10 o'clock, we had a scheduled protest at the courthouse. They began to arrive early, and again around 10. They really just stayed at the courthouse for the most part early in the day. About 1:30, they began to march around again downtown. A similar circumstance in that you had a large crowd at the beginning. That crowd kind of left, leaving kind of a core group. And then something different Sunday, we began to see people come up and get dropped off later in the day, and very active in that, increasing that crowd pretty rapidly. They moved through the city, leaving the courthouse, and really over the next several hours, you had events where they would block traffic in the middle of the street, running over innocent people's cars who were trying to drive downtown, attempting to block the Main Street Bridge on numerous occasions. We did have bottles thrown again on Sunday, and again, we had responded and had officers able to respond close by when those actions shifted from being peaceful into being a more lawless group. So we gave several commands to disperse and leave the area, and ultimately a lot of that group attempted to make its way back to the courthouse. So remember, as Sunday progressed, we had just finished Saturday, and so our posture was not to allow just incremental steps toward the rioting again, and that's what we saw from the group. So incrementally ramping up, challenging police officers, again, the throwing of bottles, blocking of traffic. So that's when we made the determination that obviously it was no longer a peaceful assembly and that we would order the group to disperse. We did that. We gave them several avenues to leave the area. A lot of them took advantage of that. Some of them didn't. And on Sunday, we made 53 arrests. 39 of those were from Duval County. So 22% of those residents were not from Duval County. Most of those were from around the state, not necessarily a national presence. So the charges, again, included breach of peace, riot, unlawful assembly, resisting with violence, carrying a concealed firearm, and attempting to make explosive devices. One item of note, so our federal partners will be digging into the backgrounds of all the individuals that were arrested, and we'll get more of a picture of who potentially may have been involved in these events. So Sunday we had one officer injured, no real reports of property damage. However, all of the pictures that you see here, minus the police car, but the items on the bottom, so the Molotov cocktail, the gas-filled balloons, the hatchet/crowbar, and the live handgun with live rounds, a loaded handgun, all were recovered on Sunday from that event. So, again, shortly thereafter, in conversations with the mayor and monitoring intelligence channels and seeing where potentially other protests may have been scheduled for Sunday night, we made the decision to ask the mayor to issue a state of emergency again and issue a curfew in the city. I have to tell you, I think that was a really good decision. I applaud the mayor for listening to the appeal and making that decision. I think it really helped us on Sunday night to avoid what we felt like was avoidable, making the right calls, and we were able to do that. Monday, again, yesterday, very small group at the courthouse, very cooperative, lots of interaction with JSO in terms of dialogue about, when they wanted to march, hey, we're going to go this way, we're going to stay on the sidewalk again. We did all we could to help them peacefully protest. We actually had one person later in the day arrested last night, and most of the group cheered the police when they made the arrest and said he'd been attempting to aggravate the crowd all day, and they were glad that he was had finally been arrested. So a peaceful event all day yesterday, Monday. So we have no protest plan moving forward. We obviously are monitoring that. We'll continue to monitor that. Our posture is this, as it was at the beginning of this weekend, and will remain so. We will always protect people's right to peacefully protest. They have a constitutional right to do that, and we have a duty to protect that, and we will always do that. However, as soon as the first rock is thrown or the first fire is lit, it is no longer a peaceful protest. You can't go from breaking the law back to peaceful protest, breaking the law back to peaceful. We're not going to allow that to happen. We do that because we were trying to protect our city and the residents of our city. So we'll continue to maintain that posture, and I think it has helped us this weekend moving forward. So again, we have that data. I know we can release some information, more information if you need it, on terms of numbers and that type of thing. I think a lot of that may have been released already. And so then, again, just wanted to give a recap of the weekend, put some comments out there, and with that, we can all answer a couple questions.
Sheriff, can you confirm maybe numbers or how many explosive devices have been found in or on vehicles in the past few days, just in the downtown area maybe?
So I don't know about in or on vehicles. I know we have the Molotov cocktail. I don't know how many balloons we found filled with gasoline. We will compile all that and get some of that to you.
Do you have the names of those individuals that had the explosive devices? Have those been released yet?
I'm not sure if they have. We do have the names of most of that was almost one guy from Sunday, but a lot of the other items were other people. So we can get that information to you. I don't have it here with me now.
You don't have his name?
I do not.
Sheriff, one of the main points of concerns that a lot of the protesters had was the body camera videos that are being demanded to be released and the transparency moving forward. And that was even a point of discussion in that virtual meeting in the last hour and a half or
Sure.
so. Will that policy change moving at all going forward? And specifically in speaking about the Jamie Johnson case as well?
So let me speak to that briefly. So these events this weekend is not about body camera footage. So you had 70 cities around the country erupt in violence, and it's not because of Jacksonville's body camera policy. That being said, we have always had very active conversations about body camera policy. We release body camera footage every day. Some of the more complicated cases, the more complex cases where you have a state attorney's office review ongoing, the criminal investigations on police officers that occur after an officer-involved shooting, which is mainly the focus of these conversations, that's where the footage has not yet, and I say yet, been released because they haven't worked their way through the process yet. Our very first officer-involved shooting captured on body camera video was 2019. So we have and we've explained the process many times, state attorney's office's review of the case to determine whether or not the officer broke the law. And then we have other restrictions on our review of the case that's really an internal investigation of the police officer, and we're bound by state law in how we address those investigations. When it gets to the end of that, our plan has always been, obviously, to release that body camera footage. So we have our very first case. We will have our response to resistance board next week, and depending on the outcome of that, as long as there's not a protracted internal investigation, and we don't anticipate that there will be, that'll be the first body camera footage that we release, because it will be public record at that point, of an officer-involved shooting in Jacksonville. The Jamie Johnson case is still under review by the state attorney's office. Now, we have had, the state attorney and I, Ms. Nelson, a lot of discussion in the last couple of days about, when is an appropriate time to release, by law, the body camera footage, those type of things. So that's the concern. This is a new process for the nation. So remember, body cameras are a new thing just a couple of years ago. We are one of the few agencies in the country where every officer has a body camera. It's not a department where we've got, 1,800 people and 300 have a body camera. Every sworn officer below the rank of lieutenant wears a body camera every time they put their uniform on. So we're committed to that process, and we would not have committed to it if we were not going to share video. I mean, that's just, but again, there's some complexities that we have to work through. You may see some changes if we can legally, and again, we've had a lot of good conversation about how that, where a release point is in the video, where does it become public record, but doesn't impact the case negatively. And when I say that, once you put a piece of evidence, and that's what body camera footage is evidence. Once you put a piece of evidence out to the community, nobody else can really come forward and speak to that evidence because we don't know if they really are a witness or if they've just watched something on television. So it's a challenge for us to be able to work through. And we're prior to this, ongoing conversations about it. During this, obviously, we're still having those conversations. But I do want to make the distinction that, this is not what this is about. It's part of a discussion we need to have with the community that we've been having and will continue to have. But this did not lead to this weekend here in Jacksonville. Yes, ma'am.
It was moving forward, though, because a lot of people expressed concerns to us about the body cameras.
Right.
Are you open to change in the policy of when body camera footage would be released going forward?
So, short answer to that is yes, as long as we can legally do that, and it does not impact those investigations. It doesn't destroy the investigations. It's not as important to release footage as it is to make sure we get those investigations correct. So I would say this to people who want to see footage immediately. What if we released footage and it negatively impacted a case and we did have an officer that had broken the law? And now there's no way that officer is going to get convicted because we've released body camera footage and we tainted the investigation. So those are discussions that we're having with the state attorney now. And so we'll continue to do that. If we can find a release point that we think doesn't impact the case, and this is a joint conversation for us to have with the state attorney, it doesn't negatively impact the case, and it's not a violation of law. We're not violating, labor contracts or court decisions or things that restrict us because of internal investigations of police officers being covered under state law. If we can find a point there, then absolutely. I mean, we didn't record the video to hide it, but we've got to do it legally. Our position has always been we just want to follow the law. We're not trying to create new law. We're trying to follow what's there. And sometimes it's challenging when you put a new technology on top of that. But again, conversations were ongoing before. They continue now, and they'll continue, until we find a solution. But we're continuing to work on that as we go.
Sheriff,
Yes, ma'am.
please clarify. I believe you said you release body camera footage all the time, but yet you're saying next week could be the first time you're going to release footage.
So next week will be the first officer-involved shooting.
Okay.
So remember, we record everything on body cameras. So that's the first piece of video involving an officer-involved shooting that will be released. So, yes, ma'am. And other video is out there. And I've been asked a question, too. So our policy, remember, we'll take you back a couple of years. We did 7 town hall meetings to get input from the community on our policy. We took lots of time developing that policy. We looked at 75, 80 policies around the country. We flew people to other agencies to look at their policies. We talked to union members and union leaders around the country, talked to our union about the policy. That's a really good model body camera policy. Now, again, it's a new piece of technology. Those things will grow and continue to morph, but that policy has been posted since we approved it. It's online. You can go to our transparency site and see it. And so, we want to make sure that the idea that we have not had conversations about the policy, that we don't have a good policy or it's haphazard, that's just not the case. And again, we'll always continue to have conversations with the community about whatever the issue is, to include body camera policy.
Sheriff, in terms of the violence that we saw perpetrated in the state recently, is there any evidence that a single group or perhaps groups or organized groups was responsible for that?
So absolutely in terms of tactics, absolutely in terms of communication, and we may not have the evidence in terms of the people that we arrested when you talk about groups like Antifa, there's no membership list. And we have, it's not you can go and check to make sure and see if they are involved in that or not. But we clearly see, organization to some of the activity that we had this weekend. Pre-placed items to throw, again, some level of communication that was obvious in watching the events and being on the ground and seeing that. But again, a lot of people involved in that, not busloads of people from out of town, but it doesn't take but 2 or 3 to help organize and aggravate a situation that may be this close to bubbling over anyway. And so that's the kind of thing I think we saw here. Other cities may see things a little differently. The things we recovered, again, tactically what they were doing, we can compare that to other cities and see a lot of similarities. If you look at some of the graffiti, there's a lot of similarities in the graffiti that you see around the country. So as we look at that, those are the indicators that we see. But again, I think you may have bigger presence in other cities, but we certainly had some type of influence of that here in Jacksonville.
Sheriff, talking about the tactics that the Sheriff's Office is using here, when we look at other municipalities in Florida, for example, like Miami, we've seen protesters going into the streets, and that's been kind of a common thing in
Sure.
Tampa as well. And as we've been seeing protests over the weekend, it's really been stay on the sidewalks, people are coming off the sidewalks or just getting arrested. So I wonder if you could talk about, the Sheriff's Office approach to that, approach to
Right.
protesters going in the streets, how that might differ here in Jacksonville.
So that's not necessarily true. So we've had lots of protesters in the street over the last several days. And when we organize, as an example, Saturday when we started, we had several blocks of downtown blocked to allow them to march in the street because of the numbers. And really volume kind of sometimes dictates that. So that's why we want to work with the organizers and work with the protesters at the scene. By and large, I say by and large, 100% of the time, we get great cooperation from those that are there to peacefully protest and have their voice heard. We never have an issue with that. It's the after effects of that. So when you have a group of 5 that claim to be a peaceful group and they want to walk down the middle of the street and run over someone's car as they stop it, I mean, we're just not going to allow that to happen. That's not a peaceful protest. So again, and we will stay in that posture moving forward.